This is the midterm review for special problems in animation. Computer terms and definitions. So a bit is the term used for a binary digit, which is the smallest unit of computer memory. It can be 0 or 1. It can be on or off. Computer memory is a measured state change. The term is derived from the old song phrase, shave and a haircut, 2 bits. A byte is a group of 8 bits, also called an octet. A pixel is a picture element, which is one dot of light on the screen. A computer screen consists of a grid pattern of dots. Computer animation terms. So FPS stands for frames per second. This is the unit of frame rate, and it determines how smooth the animation will seem. This semester, we are rendering our animations at 29.97 frames per second. Common frame rates include 24, the standard adopted for sound movies and 35mm sound film in the 20s and 30s. And also this would be the speed you would perhaps run it if you were planning on making it into a movie. 25p, which is a video format used for compatibility with television frame rates, and then 30p, which is a progressive video format. Some important animators that we talked about are Winsor McCay, Walt Disney, and Max and Dave Fleischer. Winsor McCay was an early groundbreaking animator who released Gertie the Dinosaur in 1913 and inspired Disney and Fleischer to become animators themselves. So they both saw the film in 1913 and they mentioned it as being an important part of their development. Walt Disney, he was the early animator who became perhaps the most important of his generation. He introduced Mickey Mouse, sound animation, Technicolor cartoons, and the silly symphonies. You remember we watched the early sound film Steamboat Willie, which this is a frame from. Max and Dave Fleischer were early animators who invented rotoscoping. Remember we rotoscoped the Greyhound. They were the animators of the Out of the Inkwell series, Betty Boop, Popeye, and Superman. Rotoscoping is a method of tracing filmed or videotaped movements to create natural motion in animation. It was invented by Max Fleischer in 1917. The Fleischers held the patent for both the machine, which Max invented, and for the technique of rotoscoping itself. We used rotoscoping to trace an image sequence of a greyhound running from Edward Muybridge's Sequential Images. Now, some animation terms and definitions. In classic animation, a keyframe is a frame showing an important change in position or appearance, used as a guide for subsequent action, used in storyboards to tell the story. And here's a classic keyframe from the animation of a blender saying Varoom. In computer animation, the keyframe holds important information about position, scale, opacity, rotation, and orientation for a specific point in time on the timeline. And in After Effects, the keyframe symbol looks like this. A frame is a single image that is part of a scene, like a word in writing. So this would be one frame of a film about a dog. Animation terms and definitions. A scene is an action unbroken by any change to another visual, which would be like a sentence in writing. Whereas a sequence is a series of scenes expressing a single theme, which would be like a paragraph made of several sentences. And now more description of a storyboard. It's a visual outline of an animation or a movie, using keyframes to describe the action. It contains notes about dialogue, camera moves, and editing. And another term is in-betweens. These are the frames which fill in the gradual changes between the keyframes to create the illusion of a smooth movement. Now, the different kinds of graphics that we've been using, vector graphics, which is what we were using in the Animate program, use mathematical formulas to describe the shapes in the file. The fonts can be scaled without losing definition and appear the same at any resolution. In raster graphics, the image is composed of individual pixels on a two-dimensional grid. The scaled fonts can appear jagged and fuzzy, especially when you go from a very small to a very large size. Now, we are using After Effects, which is primarily outputs as raster graphics, but you're able to use vector graphics during the development stages. So that's why we are changing the text from the Photoshop file into editable text, so you will be able to make those changes without losing resolution. Now, more computer terms and definitions. A pixel is a picture element, meaning one dot of light on the screen. The raster map is a grid filled with pixel dots to create the picture. In a raster image, when the object is magnified, the dots become larger and more apparent, so the resolution, or number of pixels per inch, will determine the clarity of detail of the image. Now this is vector versus raster. This is a vector rectangle, which I drew as a vector rectangle shape in Photoshop, and then I duplicated the square and rasterized it. I transformed the scale and made both squares bigger by the same amount. The vector image still appears sharp and clean, but the raster image is much fuzzier and has halos. The rule of thirds is one of the theories that we have talked about to use to compose your image. So it's a compositional theory or a design theory. The rule of thirds is a general theory that divides an image plane into 9 equal zones by placing 2 equally spaced vertical and 2 equally spaced horizontal lines. And then the artist will organize objects in space by arranging the image using these guides, either to locate things along the lines or intersections or somehow relate objects to the grid structure. Photography, film, painting, and other fields use this theory. So this is a rule of thirds in horizontal orientation used to investigate Edward Hopper's Cape Cod Afternoon, which he painted in 1936. Another design theory that we might use to organize our space and compose our image would be the dominant versus subordinate, where you use placement, size, and relationships between objects to tell your audience what is important, or hierarchy, how it is related to the space and to other objects, and what your animation means. Larger objects will be seen as more important. Objects in the foreground have more importance than objects in the background. So dominance, and you can see this is the Liszewski painting or piece with, and I can't remember what it's called. It's the reds and the whites was, and it was some kind of a political statement about reds and whites back in the days of the Russian Revolution. Dominance is determined by size, shape, color. You can see the red is much more dominant than the white. Value, depth, texture, density, how close things are together, saturation, and orientation. Also, we use color theory of using warm and cool colors, different kinds of color aspects to determine how we see something. So warmer colors like magenta, red, orange, and yellow will come forward visually and dominate the space, but cool colors like green, blue, and violet tend to recede. Also, the saturation will make a difference. There are warmer hues of green and cooler hues of yellow, and colors can be warmed or cooled by mixing with the other hues. Very saturated colors will come forward, and reduced shades recede, while pale tints of colors may recede, but when placed next to darker colors will come forward. So the comparison with nearby colors determines the color effect. Joseph Albers was an important theorist on the use of color in art. Now the design principles of Gestalt. So the Gestalt design principles, we'll go through these quickly, and these are illustrated more or less so you can understand what I mean. So the figure ground, the figure is the positive image, the ground is the negative space or white space. So you can see this as two people who are silhouetted against a window, or you can see it as a vase. So the figure and the ground flip. This is the equilibrium of a space. Every psychological field tends towards balance, order, and maximum efficiency. So if something looks unbalanced, your mind attempts to balance it somehow. Isometric correspondence. People are reminded of their physical or psychological experiences by images that trigger the memory, like snowflakes, kitty cats, caution signs, stoplights, a flower. Closure. We have a natural tendency to close gaps and complete an unfinished form visually, such as pliers or a gate in a fence or the opening of the letter C, etc. Proximity. Closer shapes form groups by visually uniting, so they look like they belong together. This is like being in a game of football or something. You can tell when they're together and they're apart. But also you've got color and everything too. Continuation. A straight line or a curve like an arrow will start your eyes following, and you will keep looking along that direction until something else stops you. Then similarity. This is the other team thing. Identical objects will be seen together in groups. Similar objects are defined by shape, size, color, and direction. Sports uniforms use similarity so we can tell the teams apart. And this is very important when they start running together and you can't tell very well what each person is, who each person is, but if they're wearing the right color, you know they're on your team. Then the persistence of vision. This is that thing that makes you see things moving. So the eye sees images in sequence changing quickly, and the images will persist on the retina until they are replaced by the next image. They are interpreted by the brain as smooth motion. This concept is the basis for movies, video, and animation, etc. So this is a phenakistoscope. That's an early type of animation before they figured out how to project images. They had things that you would do in your parlor and just put together yourself. So this is a very early animation. Of course, it doesn't have a plot. The additive color system is a system that is used for anything that is got a basis of light. So since we are looking at a computer screen and it is creating light by turning on the pixels, we are using the additive color system. So the primary colors are red, blue, and green. And the secondary colors are cyan, yellow, and magenta. These are the colors that are created by adding together the two adjacent colors. So red and green make yellow. Red and blue make magenta. Green and blue make cyan. Added all together, they all make white, because this is an adding of lights. Subtractive color, you see the color that isn't absorbed. So it's taken away from the light spectrum. So the subtractive color system is cyan, magenta, yellow, and then all of them together is black. And you always use black as an extra ink because you can't get ink to mix perfectly. But yellow and cyan make green. Cyan and magenta make a very deep blue, and magenta and yellow make red. So then we've got the 12 principles of animation as described by Holly Johnston and Frank Thomas. Squash and stretch. These are just the ones I think are important, but squash and stretch will make a shape change to follow the direction that it is moving and flatten as it lands. The volume stays the same if it stretches longer and it becomes skinnier. If it becomes flatter, it also becomes fatter. This makes an object appear to be moving naturally, and you can see this. This is a sequence that was drawn by Preston Blair. Then we've got the principle of anticipation, and that's what the string is doing there. When the character is about to make a move, he pulls back to collect energy like a cat crouching before leaping. And you remember when we did the anticipation and the squash and stretch animation in class. Now also we talked about straight ahead. We had additive, subtractive, and manual transform. So A, B, and C. And again, here's the pose to pose. The time of the move is calculated. When does it start? How long does it last? And where does it end? And the number of frames needed is determined. The beginning pose of the move is drawn, the ending pose is drawn, and a position in the middle is drawn. And then we use onion skinning, which is a semi-transparent overlay, to finish the sequence with in-betweening. Now, pose to pose is also one of the straight ahead principles of animation. Now, ease in and ease out is also called slow in, slow out. In After Effects, we ease in to the station. So ease in starts out fast and slows down. And in After Effects, we ease out from the station. It starts out slowly and speeds up. So remember that. And some shots in filmmaking. We compose the frame. Establishing shots are set back from the characters to show enough information to set up all the basics of the situation, where it takes place and what is happening. So you see on the far left at the bottom, this is an establishing shot. Medium shots are closer and more intimate and allow the viewers to hear the dialogue and see the details of action. So you see there's a medium shot. You can see that the characters are shown from the waist up. And then a close-up shot is much closer and shows a lot of detail of action and facial expression, so you can really focus on that particular character. Now, some of the file formats and extensions that we've used. The PSD file is really important because that's what we're using to import into After Effects. This is the Photoshop file format that allows you to have layers, and you can have actual text layers, which when you import into After Effects can be converted to editable text. An AI file is an Illustrator file. It's a proprietary file format for Adobe Illustrator. It's vector-based imagery, and it has the ability to be imported into After Effects and then changed into shape layers, which you can use and do anything to it that a shape animation can do. Also, Illustrator layers can be continuously rasterized for sharper resolution so that it keeps changing the resolution as you zoom in. This is much different than what happens with a Photoshop file. The AEP file is the proprietary file format for Adobe After Effects. A project file. After Effects is visual effects and compositing application that's used for motion graphics and film production. And then the other types of files, the MP4, this is the type that we have been outputting, which is a digital media format based on QuickTime for compressed video files. And that's what we get when we use the H.264 and we apply the compression that we've talked about in class. An MP3 is also an audio coding format for digital audio. So it's got a similar name, but it's a different type of file entirely. AIFF is an audio interchange file format, which is a digital audio file format developed by Apple Incorporated in 1988. And this is a file format that is not compressed. And then a WAV file is a waveform audio file format, an audio file format standard developed for storing audio on PCs. a Windows and IBM audio file format. So we also use the WAV files because they are not compressed when we're importing some of our sound. If we have trouble with loss of clarity in the sound, we'll want to make sure it's a WAV file before we import it. And that's the end.